I am Margaret Chen, 62 years old, and at my son's engagement party in a $25 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, the woman he planned to marry stood before 200 guests and announced I would not be invited to their wedding because they wanted a day without drama from the older generation. Dylan, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died when he was 8, sat 3 feet away and said nothing. 35 years of devotion, every dream I buried, every mission I turned down to be his mother instead of a pilot. And I became an afterthought delivered in a champagne toast. But what they didn't know, what Dylan himself had never bothered to learn, was that the quiet woman in the simple black dress they were dismissing had once been called Reaper Zero, and I still remembered how to fly through storms no one else would touch. Have you ever become invisible in your own family? Not through death or distance, but through their choice to stop seeing you? The penthouse smelled like lilies and money, that particular scent of wealth so old it doesn't need to announce itself. Crystal chandeliers caught the September sunset and threw golden fragments across marble floors. White-gloved servers moved through clusters of guests holding champagne flutes that probably cost more than my first car. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city spread out 40 stories below, and tried to remember why I'd agreed to come. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, cream cardstock with embossed gold lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Whitmore request the honor of your presence at an engagement celebration for their daughter Amber and Dylan Chen. My son's name looked strange in that formal script, like it belonged to someone I'd never met. Maybe it did. I wore Oscar de la Renta, vintage 1994, the black cocktail dress I'd bought the year Thomas got sick, back when I still thought pretty clothes might distract him from the headaches. The pearls at my ears had been his last anniversary gift, 3 months before the brain cancer diagnosis. Simple, elegant, practical, the kind of outfit that blended into upscale gatherings without drawing attention, which was exactly what I'd wanted when I dressed this morning in my Brooklyn brownstone. Wrong choice, apparently. Amber Whitmore, 28 years old and born with advantages she'd never had to earn, found me during cocktail hour. She wore Valentino. I recognized the cut because I'd learned to identify expensive things after years of consulting work, and diamonds that caught light like warnings. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Margaret, I'm so glad you could make it." Not Mrs. Chen, not Dylan's mother. Just Margaret, like we were contemporaries, like the 34 years between us meant nothing. "The penthouse is beautiful," I said, because my mother raised me to be gracious even when grace wasn't deserved. "Oh, this old thing?" She gestured at the multi-million-dollar view with perfectly manicured nails. "Daddy bought it in the 80s. We barely use it anymore." Her gaze traveled down my dress, lingered on the pearl earrings. "That's such a practical look. Very you." Practical. The word landed like a slap disguised as small talk. "I've always believed in simplicity," I said, my voice steady. 30 years of military training taught me how to keep emotion off my face, how to smile while calculating exactly how much force it would take to make someone regret their choices. I didn't use that training often anymore, but I remembered. "How sweet." She touched my arm, the gesture proprietary, marking territory. "You know, Dylan has been so stressed about work lately. Goldman Sachs is just brutal. I keep telling him he needs to relax, not worry so much about impressing people. He's with me now. He's already impressive." The implication hung between us like smoke. You raised him to be anxious, to feel less than, to try too hard. I fixed all that. I wanted to tell her that Dylan learned his work ethic from watching his father fight cancer with dignity, from seeing me wake up at 5 every morning to pack his lunch and still make it to consulting meetings on time. I wanted to explain that stress wasn't something I taught him. It was what kept food on our table and clothes on his back after Thomas died. But silence has always been my sharpest weapon. So I just smiled and excused myself to find the restroom. The bathroom was bigger than Dylan's first bedroom. Marble countertops, gold fixtures, fresh orchids, and crystal vases. I locked the door and let myself breathe for the first time in an hour. My reflection looked back from an ornate mirror, 62 years old, silver threading through black hair I'd stopped dyeing 5 years ago. crow's feet earned from squinting through cockpit windows, laugh lines from raising a child who used to think I hung the moon. When did he stop looking at me that way? The shift had been gradual, then sudden, like ice cracking under weight. Dylan went to Harvard Business School in 2008, full scholarship earned through the same determination that got him through his father's death, and my rotating shifts between consulting jobs and soccer practice. I was proud. God, I was so proud. My son, who grew up in a modest Brooklyn brownstone, competing with legacy admits and old money. He graduated with honors in 2012, landed at Goldman Sachs 3 months later, and somewhere in the smooth transition from student to investment banker, he started editing me out of his success story. The first time I noticed, he was 26, 2 years into his job. We met for dinner at a restaurant he'd chosen. Expensive, the kind of place where menu prices were suggestions rather than obstacles. He corrected my pronunciation of bruschetta in front of the waiter, not cruelly, just casually, the way you'd correct a child who didn't know better. It's bruschetta, Mom. The ch is a hard K sound in Italian. I'd been ordering bruschetta wrong for 30 years apparently, and no one had bothered to tell me until my own son decided my ignorance reflected poorly on him. Thanks, honey, I'd said, and watched him relax, pleased he'd helped me avoid embarrassment. He didn't seem to notice he'd caused it instead. The corrections multiplied. Grammar, in emails, fashion choices during rare visits. My working-class background, mentioned with apologetic shrugs when he introduced me to his new friends. I tried to understand. His world was different from mine. Boardrooms and networking events, clients who measured worth in quarterly earnings and hedge fund returns. He needed to fit in. I got that. But understanding didn't stop it from hurting. A knock on the bathroom door pulled me back to the present. Just a minute, I called, running cold water over my wrists the way my mother taught me when emotions needed managing. I touched Thomas's pearls, small anchors to a time when I knew exactly who I was. Sandra Chen's daughter, Thomas Chen's wife, Dylan's mother, Lieutenant Commander Margaret Sullivan Chen, call sign Reaper Zero, the pilot who brought 11 men home through a Category 3 storm in Kandahar, when every other aviator called the mission suicide. But that was 24 years ago, and the woman in the mirror wasn't wearing a flight suit anymore. She was wearing vintage Oscar de la Renta and trying not to cry in a billionaire's bathroom. I fixed my lipstick, squared my shoulders, and went back to the party. Dylan found me near the catering table, where I'd taken refuge behind a strategic arrangement of orchids. He looked uncomfortable in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, like success was clothing he hadn't quite grown into yet. Mom, hey. He kissed my cheek, the gesture automatic, muscle memory from childhood. Thanks for coming. Of course. I studied his face, Thomas's eyes, my stubborn chin, worry lines that seemed too deep for 35. How are you? Good. Busy. You know how it is. He glanced over his shoulder, tracking Amber's position in the crowd like a sailor watching weather patterns. The wedding's going to be crazy. June, probably. Amber wants St. Patrick's Cathedral, then reception at the plaza. Her parents know everyone, so the guest list is already at 400. 400 people. I did the math automatically, the way I used to calculate fuel loads and passenger weight. That's quite an event. Yeah, he rubbed the back of neck, another childhood tell. Actually, Mom, about that, we need to talk about Dylan, darling. Amber materialized with another woman in tow. This one older, blonde hair perfectly preserved, wearing Chanel like armor. Your mother absolutely must meet mine. Mother, this is Margaret, Dylan's mom. Patricia Whitmore extended her hand the way queens grant audiences, and I shook it because refusing would have been petty, and I'd never been petty in my life. Her grip was surprisingly strong, calluses hidden under expensive lotion. This woman had worked once before marrying into money erased the evidence. How lovely to finally meet you. Patricia's smile matched her daughter's, all performance, no substance. Dylan speaks of you so rarely, I was beginning to think you were a myth. The words were wrapped in silk, but the blade underneath was sharp enough to draw blood. I prefer to let my son live his own life, I said, each word carefully measured. Independence is important. How modern of you. Patricia sipped her champagne, her gaze cataloging my dress, my shoes, my worth. Amber tells me you worked in aviation. Some sort of consulting? Some sort of consulting. Like 30 years of expertise was a hobby I'd picked up between book club meetings. That's right. And you're retired now, I assume? It must be nice to relax after all those years of work. She made work sound like something distasteful, something people did because they lacked alternatives. I still consult occasionally, when the project interests me. How industrious. The word dripped with something that might have been admiration, if it wasn't so clearly disdain. Well, you've certainly raised a wonderful young man. We're thrilled to welcome him into our family. Into our family. Not joining our families, just him. Singular. Dylan shifted his weight, uncomfortable but silent. This was when a son was supposed to speak up, to remind his future in-laws that he came with history, with a mother who'd put everything aside to raise him right. But Dylan just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at his shoes. "If you'll excuse me," I said, the lie forming smoothly. "I need to make a phone call. Work thing." No one protested. No one wished me to stay. I walked away from my own son and his future wife and her mother, and none of them even turned to watch me go. The balcony was empty, cold September air cutting through my dress like truth through fiction. 40 stories below, New York stretched out in every direction, millions of lives happening simultaneously, and not one of them cared that Margaret Chen was realizing her son was ashamed of her. When had it happened? When did I become the embarrassing detail he needed to manage, rather than the mother who raised him? My phone buzzed. A text from James Miller, retired Chief Warrant Officer, the man who taught me how to maintain rotary aircraft and when to trust my instincts over my instruments. We'd stayed in touch over the years, quarterly lunches in Queens, where he now ran a private workshop restoring vintage motorcycles. Making any wedding plans? Or are you too busy being respectable? I smiled despite everything. Miller was the only person left who remembered who I used to be. Not invited, I typed back. Apparently, I'm the older generation they want to avoid. The dots appeared immediately as he typed. Then, what? Before I could respond, someone cleared their throat behind me. I turned to find Dylan standing in the doorway, his expression guilty and defensive in equal measure. "Mom, He stopped, started again. Amber's mom didn't mean anything by that comment. She's just... That's how they talk. In their world. Their world. Not his world. Still trying to separate himself from where he came from. It's fine, Dylan. No, it's not. I can tell you're upset. I'm not upset. The lie came easily, practiced from years of swallowing hurt, so my child wouldn't see it. I'm just getting some air. He joined me at the railing, both of us staring out at the city rather than at each other. The skyline was turning purple, office buildings lighting up like tiny universes. "Remember when you used to take me to the Brooklyn Bridge?" His voice had gone soft, nostalgic. "We'd get ice cream and you'd let me lean over the railing even though Dad said it was dangerous. You were wearing a harness," I reminded him. "Safety first." "You always said that. Safety first, then adventure." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I miss that, the simplicity of it. "Life gets complicated." "Yeah." The smile faded. "Listen, Mom, about the wedding. Amber and I have been talking, and we want to keep it really intimate. Just our closest circle, small and meaningful." Something cold settled in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "How small?" "Like 100 people, maybe less. Immediate family only." "I see." "It's not personal, it's just... There's a lot of stress with the planning, and Amber's parents are handling most of it since they know all the vendors. And we want it to be perfect, you know? No distractions." Distractions. I'd become a distraction. "Dylan, are you..." I couldn't finish the question. Couldn't make him say it out loud. "Amber thinks it would be better if..." He stopped, clearly struggling. "She thinks that having you there might create some tension with her family. They have expectations about how things should look, and I don't fit the aesthetic." The words came out sharper than intended, cutting through his careful diplomacy. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? I turned to face him fully, studying the man my son had become. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive shame about where he came from. Tell me what you mean then. Explain how your mother attending your wedding creates tension. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These people, Amber's family, they're connected. They can help my career. One wrong move and what? Your mother's presence is a wrong move? Mom, please don't make this harder than it is. Harder for whom exactly? He flinched, and for a second, just a second, I saw the 8-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who needed me to check under the bed for monsters, who thought I was the bravest person in the world. Then he blinked, and that boy was gone. I'm sorry, he said, but he wasn't. Sorry was an obligation he was fulfilling, not an emotion he was feeling. I really am, but this is important to me, to my future. Your future. I repeated the words, testing them, trying to understand how they didn't include me. The future I set aside everything to give you. I never demanded you give up anything. No, you didn't demand. I gave because that's what mothers do. My voice stayed calm, controlled. Years of military training, keeping emotion locked behind discipline. But I'm starting to realize you have no idea what I set aside. Questions you never raised, and I never offered answers. And now it's too late for either. Mom, go back to your party, Dylan. Your fiancé will be looking for you. We'll talk about this later, when you're calmer. When I'm calmer. As if anger was the problem, not his betrayal. Sure, honey, we'll talk later. He hesitated, wanting forgiveness I wasn't ready to give, then retreated back into the penthouse. I stood alone on the balcony, 40 stories above a city where I'd built a life and raised a child and somehow still ended up invisible. The phone buzzed again. Miller, where are you? I'm calling in 5 minutes. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to explain. But Miller had flown with me, had trusted me to bring him home when weather turned bad and visibility dropped to 0, and you didn't ignore that kind of bond just because you were having a personal crisis. 4 minutes later, my phone rang. Tell me everything. So I did. The engagement party, Patricia's condescension, Dylan's careful explanation that I was uninvited from his wedding. Miller listened in silence, the kind of silence that meant he was actively choosing not to interrupt, because what he wanted to say would be too harsh for current circumstances. When I finished, he breathed out slowly. That boy forgot where he came from. He's trying to fit in. I understand. Understanding is one thing, accepting is another. Miller's voice carried the weight of 72 years, most of them spent in service to something larger than himself. Margaret, you know what bothers me most about this? What? Dylan doesn't know who you are. Not really. He doesn't know about Kandahar, about Helmand Ridge, about the 200 missions you flew before you retired to raise him. He doesn't know about Reaper Zero. That was classified. Still is, mostly. Doesn't matter. He's your son. He should know you're extraordinary. But he doesn't because those questions never occurred to him, and now he thinks you're just... What? Some retired consultant he can manage like a quarterly report? The truth of it hit harder than expected. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I should have... No. Miller cut through my self-doubt like a blade through canvas. You made the choice to be his mother instead of his hero. That was the right choice. But he owes you respect anyway. The fact that he doesn't give it? That's his failure, not yours. Something shifted inside me, a tectonic plate finding new alignment. James, what would you do if you were me? You already know what I'd do. That's why you're asking. Tell me anyway. I'd remind him who he's disrespecting, not by begging, not by explaining. I'd show him the way we showed enemy combatants that underestimating us was the last mistake they'd make. I'm 62 years old. I haven't flown combat in 24 years. Combat isn't the only battlefield. His voice carried a smile I couldn't see but could hear clearly. You want my help? I don't know what I want yet. Then figure it out. But Margaret, whatever you decide, know this. You are Reaper Zero. Civilian clothes don't change that. Neither does a kid who forgot to be grateful. After we hung up, I stayed on the balcony until my hands stopped shaking. The city lights blurred together, tears I refused to shed, turning everything into impressionist art. Inside, the party continued without me. Through the glass, I could see Dylan laughing at something Amber said, comfortable in a world that had no room for the woman who gave him life. I took out my phone and pulled up the photo I kept hidden in a locked album. Me at 38, flight suit, helmet under one arm, standing in front of my bird in Kandahar. Behind me, barely visible, were the 11 men I'd extracted that night. SEAL Team 9, pinned down with 2 critical casualties. Every other pilot refusing the mission because visibility was 0 and enemy fire was too heavy. I'd gone anyway, not because I was brave, but because leaving men behind wasn't an option in my DNA. The mission earned me the call sign, Reaper Zero, the pilot who brought death to enemies and 0 losses to our team. For 14 years, I flew special operations, 200 missions, 300 lives saved. Awards with my name redacted because having a female operator mentioned in commendations might damage male morale. Then Thomas got sick, and Dylan needed a mother more than the military needed another pilot. So I walked away from the only career that ever made sense to me. I did it without hesitation, without regret, because that's what love demanded. And now my son couldn't find space for me at his wedding. The balcony door opened again. I didn't turn around, assuming Dylan had come back for round 2 of awkward apologies. But the voice that spoke wasn't his. I hope I'm not interrupting. I turned to find a woman my age, maybe a few years younger, wearing a navy dress that screamed power without saying a word. Her hair was iron gray, cut short and practical, military bearing, even in heels. "I'm Maria Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand, friend of Richard Whitmore's from his Navy days. Well, acquaintance is more accurate. We served on the same carrier once, a lifetime ago. I shook her hand, confused. "Margaret Chen." "I know who you are, Commander." The title made me blink. Or should I say Reaper Zero? The world narrowed to the space between us, sound from the party fading to white noise. "I'm sorry, I don't—" Helmand Ridge, March 2001. Category 3 storm, 0 visibility, SEAL Team 9 pinned down. You flew in when everyone else refused. Rodriguez smiled, and it was genuine, warm, nothing like the performed courtesy inside. "I was Lieutenant Rodriguez then, working logistics stateside, and I processed the after-action reports. Your name was redacted, but I remembered the mission. Unknown female operator who did the impossible." My throat tightened. That was a long time ago. 24 years. But legends don't expire. She moved to the railing beside me, both of us facing the city. "I overheard your conversation with your son. Wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but sound carries on balconies." "It's fine." "It's not fine, it's disgraceful." Rodriguez's voice carried steel beneath the diplomatic coating. "That boy has no idea who his mother is. He knows enough." "Does he?" She pulled out her phone, typed quickly, then showed me the screen. It was a Pentagon database entry, partially declassified. Operation Helmand Ridge, successful extraction under impossible conditions. Pilot call sign Reaper Zero, 11 personnel recovered, 0 casualties despite sustained enemy fire and mechanical failures. "This was required viewing in advanced tactical training for 5 years, Rodriguez said. "Every SEAL officer studied your approach, your decision-making under pressure. You're taught as the standard for excellence in crisis aviation. And your son doesn't know." I chose not to tell him. That was my decision. And he chose not to inquire. That was his. She put her phone away. "Margaret, I'm in DC now, consulting for the Pentagon. I still have connections, still have access to resources. If you ever want to remind someone of who you really are, I can help with that." "Why would you help me?" "Because women like us, women who serve, who step back from glory, who get redacted from our own achievements, we have to look out for each other." Rodriguez handed me a business card, simple white cardstock with a phone number. "Call me if you need anything." And I mean anything. Inside, someone was tapping a microphone. Speech time. "I should get back," Rodriguez said. "But Margaret, don't let them make you small. You're Reaper Zero, act like it." She left me alone with her card and the memory of who I used to be. Through the glass, I could see Amber stepping up to a microphone. Glass of champagne raised high. Guests clustered around her, phones out, ready to capture whatever announcement she was about to make. I should have left then. Should have walked out, called a car, gone home to Brooklyn, and let Dylan live his life without my inconvenient presence. But something kept me standing there, watching. Maybe curiosity. Maybe masochism. Maybe the same instinct that used to warn me when weather was about to turn dangerous, when the safe choice was about to become the deadly one. Amber tapped the microphone, waited for silence. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," she began, voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. "Dylan and I are so grateful for your support as we start this incredible journey together." Applause rippled through the crowd. Dylan stood beside her, smiling, his hand on her waist like he was anchoring himself to this new life. "As most of you know, we're planning a June wedding at St. Patrick's Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Plaza." More applause. "It's going to be absolutely magical." She paused, and I felt it coming like turbulence on clear air. The thing you can't see but know is there, waiting to tear you apart. Now, about the wedding itself. Dylan and I have talked a lot about what we want this day to represent. We want intimacy. We want meaning. We want to celebrate our love surrounded only by the people who matter most to our future together. Her gaze swept the room, landed on me for half a second through the glass, then moved on. "So we've made the difficult decision to keep our guest list extremely tight. Immediate family only. The people who are part of our daily lives, who understand the world we're building together." Another pause, perfectly timed. "That means some people we love won't be able to attend. And that's hard. But we know those people understand. They want what's best for us, even if that means stepping back to give us space to start fresh." The words were silk over steel, polite enough to deflect criticism while making the cruelty perfectly clear. "Specifically," she continued, and my hands went cold, "Dylan's mother, Margaret, won't be attending. We want this day to be about our future, not about bridging generational differences or managing family dynamics. This is our moment, not a reunion. And we hope everyone here respects that choice." Silence fell like snow, smothering everything. 200 people turned toward the balcony doors, toward me, toward the woman who'd just been publicly uninvited from her own son's wedding by a girl who'd never worked a day in her life. Some faces showed pity. Some showed relief they weren't the ones being dismissed. Some showed nothing at all, already moving on to the next bit of gossip they could harvest from this train wreck. Dylan stood frozen beside Amber, face pale, but he didn't speak, didn't correct her, didn't defend me. That silence was louder than any speech. I could have made a scene, could have walked back inside and questioned Amber exactly who she thought she was, publicly humiliating a woman she barely knew. Could have reminded my son that the freedom to make choices like this came from someone else's dedication, someone else's sleepless nights, an empty bank account, and abandoned dreams. But silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength, dressed in dignity. So I stood there, visible through the glass, and I didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I looked at Dylan, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since he'd graduated Harvard, and I saw a stranger, a man who'd forgotten that success without integrity is just expensive failure. I took Rodriguez's card from my pocket, typed the number into my phone, and sent a text. "I need help. Tomorrow. Can we talk?" The response came in seconds. "Absolutely. I'll call you at 9 a.m. Then I turned away from the party, from my son, from the life I'd built and lost, and walked toward the elevator with my head high and my shoulders straight. Nobody tried to stop me. In the lobby, the doorman, a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd probably seen 1,000 humiliations in this building, held the door without comment. "Tough night. They usually are." "For what it's worth, ma'am, You held yourself real well up there. Dignity counts for something. Thank you. He flagged a taxi, helped me inside like I was something precious instead of something discarded, and closed the door on the worst night of my civilian life. As the cab pulled away from Central Park, from the penthouse where my son was celebrating a future that didn't include me, I looked back one time. 40 stories up, the windows glowed like a constellation, beautiful and distant and completely unreachable. But storms don't care how beautiful something looks, and neither do pilots who learn to fly when everyone else was grounded. I had Rodriguez's number. I had Miller waiting for my call, and I had 24 years of silence that was about to end. They wanted to exclude the older generation. Fine, but they should have inquired what generation I belonged to before making assumptions. Because some of us remember what it means to fight, even when the battlefield looks like a wedding instead of a war zone. And Reaper Zero never left anyone behind, not even the son who'd forgotten she existed. Rodriguez called at 8:57 the next morning, 3 minutes early, military precision even in civilian life. I was already dressed, coffee cooling on my kitchen counter, watching Brooklyn wake up through windows that needed cleaning. Autumn light made the brownstone feel smaller than usual, like the walls had drawn closer overnight. Tell me what you need. No pleasantries, no small talk. I appreciated that more than she could know. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. The Whitmore family, their connections, their vulnerabilities, their secrets. The words felt foreign in my mouth, strategic planning applied to personal warfare. And I need to know if showing Dylan who I really am would accomplish anything beyond satisfying my ego. Ego is underrated. Sometimes people need their ego satisfied just to remember they have worth. Papers rustled on her end, the sound of someone already working. But yes, let's start with intelligence gathering. Standard recon before engagement. This isn't a military operation, Maria. Isn't it? You've got hostile forces, territorial disputes, and someone who needs extracting from a bad situation. Sounds exactly like every mission we ever flew. She paused, and I heard the smile in her voice. Difference is, this time you don't need to wear a flight suit to win. We talked for 90 minutes. Rodriguez had already started digging. She must have begun last night after my text, running searches through databases most people didn't know existed. The picture she painted of the Whitmore family was intricate and damning. Richard Whitmore, Amber's father, ran a hedge fund called Whitmore Capital Partners. On paper, it managed $800 million in assets. In reality, Rodriguez found SEC filings that told a different story. Over-leveraged positions, suspicious trading patterns timed just before major market moves, and 3 separate internal investigations that had been quietly settled. He's underwater, Rodriguez explained, her voice carrying the certainty of someone reading from official documents. The fund's down 40% this year, but they've been hiding losses through creative accounting. There's an active SEC investigation. Not public yet, but my contact in enforcement says they're building toward a $50 million fine and possible criminal referrals. And the wedding? Image rehabilitation. If he can throw a massive society wedding, convince everyone his daughter is marrying into respectable money, it creates the illusion of stability. He needs good press desperately. The calculation was cold, efficient, and utterly predictable. People in freefall always grabbed at whatever looked solid, even if it meant dragging others down with them. What about Dylan's job? His position at Goldman Sachs? More rustling. Associate level, wealth management division. Good salary, $250,000 base, bonuses dependent on client retention and new business development. He's ambitious, competent, but not exceptional. The kind of guy who works 80-hour weeks and still wonders why partners don't remember his name. That hurt more than it should have, hearing my son's professional life summarized with such clinical precision. But Truth didn't care about maternal feelings. One more thing, Rodriguez added, her tone shifting. I reached out to Daniel Lawson. Remember him? Intelligence officer, Helmand Province. He processed my after-action reports. He's retired now, living in Arlington, consulting for the Pentagon on special operations strategy. I told him about your situation. She let that sink in. Margaret, he wants to help. says he owes you for keeping his analysis teams focused during some rough deployments, whatever that means. I remembered late night strategy sessions, Daniel stressed about intel gaps that could get people killed, me flying extra reconnaissance runs because good data saved lives, professional courtesy between branches, nothing dramatic. Apparently, he remembered differently. I don't need. Yes, you do. Stop pretending you can handle everything alone. That's how you ended up invisible. Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched too many capable women diminish themselves. Accept help when it's offered. That's an order, Commander. The title made me smile despite everything. I've been retired 24 years. Retirement is a state of mind, not a condition. James Miller would agree with me. You talked to James? Called him this morning. He's already in. Another pause, tactical this time. Margaret, we're building you a team, whether you want one or not. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, holding cold coffee and trying to decide if what I was planning was justice or just revenge, dressed in prettier clothes. The brownstone was too quiet. 3 floors of empty rooms I'd filled with Dylan's childhood, photographs on walls, his high school trophies in the study, the kitchen table where we'd done homework together while I balanced checkbooks and tried to make consulting fees stretch far enough to cover private school tuition. Evidence of a life built carefully, deliberately alone. Thomas smiled at me from the mantel, frozen at 32 in his navy dress uniform, 3 months before the headache started. We'd been married 10 years when he died, and in that decade, I'd learned that love was a series of negotiations between who you were and who you needed to become for someone else. He'd wanted me to keep flying, said my career mattered, that Dylan would be fine with au pairs and structure. But the night Thomas died, morphine haze, hospice bed in our living room, Dylan curled against me crying. I'd made a promise. Your son won't grow up alone. He'll have one parent who's present, who's there, who chooses him every single day. I'd kept that promise for 27 years, and Dylan repaid it by letting his fiancée publicly erase me from his life. My phone rang, unknown number, but I answered anyway because mystery callers were better than silence. Mrs. Chen, this is Amanda Castellano from the New York Times Style section. My grip on the phone tightened. How did you get this number? I was at the Whitmore engagement party last night. Friend of Patricia's, actually. Her voice carried the professional enthusiasm of someone who'd found a good story. I witnessed that rather unfortunate announcement about the wedding guest list. I'd love to get your perspective for a piece I'm writing on modern family dynamics and generational conflicts in wedding planning. I have no comment. Mrs. Chen, I understand this must be difficult, but you understand nothing. And if you print anything about me or my family, I'll make sure your editor knows you're harassing private citizens during personal crises. I hung up before she could respond, hands shaking with something that might have been rage or might have been fear, that someone was about to turn my pain into entertainment. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. Margaret, it's Daniel Lawson. Maria Rodriguez gave me your contact information. I hope that's all right. His voice carried decades of intelligence work, the careful modulation of someone trained to extract information while revealing nothing. But underneath ran genuine concern, maybe even anger on my behalf. She mentioned you might call. I'm driving up from Arlington today. I'll be in New York by 1400 hours. Can we meet? He didn't wait for an answer. There's a coffee shop in Brooklyn Heights, near the promenade. Buona vita. I'll buy you lunch and explain why I'm getting involved in something that's technically none of my business. Captain Lawson. It's just Daniel now. We're both civilians, remember? Though some habits die hard. His tone softened. Please, let me help. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Buona Vita occupied a corner storefront with large windows overlooking brownstone-lined streets. I arrived 15 minutes early out of habit, ordered an espresso I didn't drink, and watched people pass by living ordinary lives untouched by public humiliation. Lawson walked in at exactly 2 p.m., looking like retirement had been kinder to him than to most. 64 years old, silver hair military short, wearing civilian clothes that still somehow announced former officer. He spotted me immediately and crossed the cafe with the efficient movement of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Commander Chen. He offered his hand and I shook it. Margaret, please. We're civilians now, remember? Fair enough. He ordered coffee, black, and a sandwich neither of us pretended he was hungry for. When we settled at a corner table away from windows, his expression turned serious. I'm going to be direct because that's how I operate. What happened to you at that party was disgraceful, and your son should be ashamed of himself. You don't know the full situation. I know enough. Rodriguez filled me in this morning, and I spent the last 6 hours doing additional research. He pulled out a tablet, called up files with the ease of someone who'd never stopped working even after official retirement. Richard Whitmore's hedge fund is imploding. The SEC investigation is further along than most people realize. My contact there says they're looking at potential fraud charges, not just civil penalties. Rodriguez mentioned financial troubles. It's worse than troubles, it's catastrophic. Whitmore stands to lose everything: the fund, his reputation, possibly his freedom if prosecutors decide to make an example. Lawson scrolled through documents, and I caught glimpses of numbers that meant nothing without context. The wedding isn't just image rehabilitation. It's a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of stability while everything collapses. And Dylan? Your son works in wealth management. His value to Goldman Sachs is directly tied to the clients he can attract and retain. The Whitmore connection looked like a golden ticket. Marry into old money, gain access to their social network, build a client base that would secure his partnership track. Lawson met my eyes. But he bet on the wrong horse. The Whitmores are circling the drain, and when they go down, anyone connected to them goes too. The implications settled over me like weather moving in. Dylan doesn't know. I doubt it. Richard Whitmore is very good at maintaining appearances. But the truth always surfaces eventually, usually at the worst possible moment. He closed the tablet. Which brings me to why I'm here. Rodriguez told me about Helmand Ridge. My stomach tightened. That was 24 years ago. Doesn't matter. I processed those after-action reports, Margaret. I read every detail of what you did that night. Flying through conditions that would have killed 99% of pilots, navigating by instinct when instruments failed, holding position under sustained fire while casualties were loaded. His voice carried absolute conviction. You saved 11 men. Team 9's commander called it the most extraordinary piece of aviating he'd ever witnessed. And your name was redacted from every official commendation because some Pentagon bureaucrat decided female operators were bad for morale. That's how things worked back then. That's how things shouldn't have worked ever. Lawson leaned forward. Your son has no idea who his mother is. He sees a retired consultant who lives modestly in Brooklyn. He doesn't see the legend who studied in advanced tactical training, whose decisions under pressure are taught as the gold standard for crisis aviation. I chose not to tell him. That's on me. And he chose not to be curious about your history. That's on him. The sharpness in Lawson's tone could have cut glass. Margaret, I've spent 40 years in intelligence. I know what information warfare looks like. What that girl did last night, publicly excluding you, framing it as generational conflict, that was a calculated strike designed to neutralize you before you could become a problem. I'm not a problem, I'm just his mother. You're a woman with integrity who might raise uncomfortable questions about why her son is marrying someone whose family is under federal investigation. You're a person who values substance over appearance, which makes you dangerous to people whose entire existence is performance. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photograph. This was taken this morning outside the plaza. Amber Whitmore and her mother meeting with wedding planners. The image showed two women in designer clothes, laughing, completely unburdened by the destruction they'd caused last night. Patricia's hand rested on Amber's shoulder. Pride or possession, hard to tell which. They're not worried, Lawson continued. They've already moved past you. You're a solved problem in their minds, an obstacle they've neutralized. The dismissiveness of it, the casual cruelty of being erased and forgotten in less than 12 hours, ignited something that had been smoldering since last night. What are you suggesting I do? Remind them who you are. Not by begging for inclusion, not by explaining yourself, by showing them that underestimating you was the biggest mistake they could make. He put the phone away. Rodriguez mentioned you built a consulting firm after retirement. Chen's Strategic Solutions? That's right. Tell me about it. So I did. The work I'd done for the last 24 years while Dylan was at Harvard, then climbing Goldman Sachs' corporate ladder, the aviation safety protocols I designed for private military contractors, the tactical consulting for Fortune 500 companies operating in dangerous regions, the Hollywood stunt coordinators who paid premium rates for expertise that kept actors safe during aerial sequences. Annual revenue? Lawson inquired, his intelligence officer's brain already calculating. Last year, 12 million gross, 7 million after expenses and contractor payments. The firm's valued at 12 million if I ever decided to sell, which I haven't. And Dylan doesn't know. He knows I consult. He doesn't probe for details, and I don't volunteer them. Investment portfolio? 8 million. Thomas had a good life insurance policy, and I invested carefully. The numbers felt strange spoken aloud, like admitting to a secret identity. Plus, the brownstone, paid off, currently worth about 3.2 million according to the last assessment. Lawson did the math silently. 23 million, give or take. You're worth more than the Whitmores, especially now that their assets are mostly fictional. Money isn't the point. No, but it's a weapon when you need one. And right now, you need weapons. He finished his coffee, pushed the cup aside. Margaret, I want to show you something, but you have to promise not to react until you've seen all of it. He opened the tablet again, pulled up a video file. Press play, and I found myself watching security footage from the Whitmore penthouse, timestamp showing last night, angle suggesting someone had planted a camera specifically to capture the balcony. Me and Rodriguez talking. Then me alone after she left. Then Dylan joining me. Our conversation clearly audible through whatever sophisticated recording equipment someone had used. Where did you get this? I didn't. Rodriguez did. She has contacts in private security. The company that handles the Whitmore building uses former military personnel. One of them owed her a favor. Lawson's expression remained neutral. I'm not saying this is admissible in court. I'm saying you have documentation of what actually happened, unedited, complete with Dylan's exact words about why you're being excluded. The implications were immediate and uncomfortable. You want me to leak this? I want you to have options. What you do with them is your choice. He closed the tablet. But Margaret, people like the Whitmores count on victims staying silent. They count on shame and social pressure keeping mouths shut. The moment you refuse to play by those rules, their power evaporates. Miller called while Lawson was paying the check, his timing either coincidental or proof that my former comrades were coordinating behind my back. You talked to Lawson yet? Currently sitting across from him. Good. Listen, I'm coming into the city tomorrow. We need to have a proper strategy session, all of us together. Rodriguez can video conference from D.C. His voice carried the gruff affection I remembered from deployment briefings. Unless you want to handle this alone, which would be stupid. I'm considering my options. Consider faster. Dylan's wedding is 8 months away. That's not a lot of time to plan a proper response. I'm not planning a response, I stopped because I didn't actually know what I was planning. Revenge seemed too dramatic. Justice seemed too self-righteous. Maybe I just wanted my son to see me clearly for the first time in a decade. You're just protecting yourself, Miller finished for me. Nothing wrong with that. But Maggie, you taught me something a long time ago in Kandahar. Remember what you said right before that Helman Ridge mission? I did remember, though I'd tried to forget. Sometimes the only way through is forward, even when forward looks impossible. Especially when forward looks impossible. You flew into that storm because staying safe meant leaving people behind. This is the same thing, just a different kind of storm. He paused, let the weight settle. Don't leave yourself behind just because it's easier than fighting. After I hung up, Lawson walked me to my car, both of us moving slowly through Brooklyn's streets, turning gold with afternoon light. Think about what you want, he said when we reached the brownstone. Not what's appropriate or mature or socially acceptable. What do you actually want? I want my son back, the one who used to think I hung the moon. That boy doesn't exist anymore. He grew up, made choices, became someone you don't fully recognize. Lawson's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd watched too many families fracture under pressure. But the man he is now could still become someone worth knowing, if he chooses growth over comfort. And if he doesn't? Then at least you'll know you tried. That's all any of us can do. Try and accept whatever comes after. Inside the brownstone, silence felt heavier than before. I made tea I didn't drink, opened my laptop, stared at the Chen Strategic Solutions homepage I designed 5 years ago during a rare slow period. Professional, clean, deliberately understated. Nothing that screamed success or demanded attention. The client list was impressive, though few people saw it. Boeing, for safety audits on civilian helicopter fleets. Lockheed Martin, for tactical insertion protocols. The State Department, for embassy evacuation planning in hostile regions. 3 major film studios, for aerial stunt coordination. 24 years of work Dylan had dismissed with "Mom does consulting" like it was a hobby I'd picked up to stay busy. My phone buzzed. Text from a number I recognized immediately. "Dylan, Mom, can we talk? I know you're upset, but I think if we just discuss this calmly, we can work something out." Work something out. Like I was a problem requiring management rather than a person deserving respect. I typed back, "There's nothing to discuss. You made your choice clear." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "That's not fair. You're not even trying to understand my position. Your position is that I'm an embarrassment who doesn't fit your new life. I understand perfectly." No response for 5 minutes. Then, "Can I come over? We should talk face to face." Every instinct said no. Letting him into my home meant giving him access to the hurt I was still processing. The anger I hadn't fully owned yet. But the mother in me, the part that remembered midnight fevers and first day of school tears, couldn't quite refuse him entirely. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't be late, I'll be there." After I sent that text, I called Rodriguez back. "I need to know everything about Amber Whitmore, not just her father's business problems, her. Who she really is underneath the designer clothes and trust fund." "Already on it," Rodriguez replied, and I heard keyboard clicking. "Give me 12 hours. That night I dreamed about Kandahar. The storm, the darkness, the absolute certainty that I wasn't going to make it home. In the dream, though, the men I was extracting had Dylan's face, all 11 of them. And when I landed to pick them up, they looked at me and didn't recognize who I was. The helicopter wouldn't take off. Engines screaming, rotors spinning, but no lift, no motion. Just stuck in place while enemy fire got closer. And my son's face multiplied around me, wondering why his mother wasn't good enough to save him. I woke at 4 a.m. shaking. Thomas's side of the bed cold, like always. The brownstone dark, except for streetlights filtering through curtains I'd been meaning to replace for 6 years. Sleep didn't come back, so I did what I always did when rest failed me. Worked. I pulled up Chen Strategic Solutions financials, reviewed current contracts, calculated exactly how much the firm was worth if I liquidated everything today. 23.2 million, Lawson had said. He wasn't wrong. More than the Whitmores, whose wealth was mostly smoke and borrowed time. Less than what I'd relinquished by leaving the military, if you counted opportunities in pure numbers. But numbers didn't capture what mattered. They couldn't quantify the morning Dylan learned to ride his bike and I was there to catch him when he fell. They couldn't measure the parent-teacher conferences where I showed up alone but present. They couldn't calculate the value of being someone's entire safety net for 27 years. Those investments didn't appear on any balance sheet, but they were real, and Dylan had just declared them worthless. At 9:30 the next morning, I heard his key in the lock. I'd never taken it back, never changed the locks after he moved out, always maintained the fiction that this was still his home whenever he needed it. He looked tired when he came in, expensive suit rumpled like he'd slept in it, hair uncombed. For a second, I saw the teenager who used to stumble downstairs before school, sleepy and vulnerable and needing me. Then he straightened his shoulders, put on his professional face, and that boy disappeared. "Thanks for seeing me." "Sit down, I'll make coffee." "I'll make—" "Mom, you don't have to—" I said, "Sit down." He sat. I made coffee in the French press Thomas bought our second Christmas together. The one Dylan used to think was magic because hot water somehow turned into something adults couldn't live without. Poured 2 mugs, added cream to his because he'd never learned to drink it black. Set them on the kitchen table where we'd sat together 1,000 times. Talk, I said. I don't know where to start. Start with why you let that girl publicly humiliate me. It wasn't meant to humiliate you. She has strong opinions about how things should be done, and her parents are paying for most of the wedding, so you prioritize keeping peace with people you've known 6 months over the woman who raised you. It's not that simple. Then explain the complexity. Make me understand why being ashamed of me was the only option available. I kept my voice level, controlled, the way I used to during emergency landings, when panic would have killed everyone. I'm listening, Dylan. Explain. His hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was an anchor. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These people, the Whitmores, they're connected in ways that can make or break careers. One word from Richard in the right ear, and I could make partner 5 years early. Or one word the wrong way, and I'm stuck at associate level forever. So this is about your career. It's about my future. Our future, mine and Amber's. He finally met my eyes. Mom, I know you worked hard to raise me. I know you gave up things, but you did that so I could have opportunities, right? So I could build something better? I did it because I loved you. Because you were my son and I wanted you to have a good life. The distinction mattered more than he seemed capable of understanding. Not so you could trade me like currency for professional advancement. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? You're marrying a woman whose father is under federal investigation, whose family money is evaporating, who treats you like a trophy she can display when convenient. And you're letting her exclude me from your wedding because including me might make her uncomfortable. I set my mug down carefully, didn't trust my hands to stay steady otherwise. Tell me what part of that isn't trading your mother for career prospects. The investigation isn't public. Richard says it's all routine audits, nothing serious. And you believe him? Why wouldn't I? Because you were raised better than this, I wanted to say. Because your father taught you to question convenient narratives and verify claims before accepting them as truth. Because I spent 27 years modeling integrity, and apparently none of it stuck. But saying that would just make him defensive, and defensive people don't learn. Dylan, what do you actually know about me? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what do you know about my life, my work, my service before you were born? I watched his face, cataloging the confusion there. You know I was in the Navy. You know I flew helicopters. You know I consulted after I retired, but what else? I don't know. You never talked about it much. True, but questions work both ways. When did you last wonder about the life I led before becoming your mother? You were always focused on me, on my school, my future, my life. His voice carried something that might have been accusation. It felt like you didn't want to talk about yourself. I didn't talk about myself because every conversation centered on you, your needs, your problems, your dreams. I made you the focus of my universe, Dylan. The words hurt coming out. Truth usually did. And somewhere in that process, you started believing the universe actually did revolve around you. He flinched. That's not fair. Fair or not, it's accurate. When's the last time you inquired how I was doing? Not as conversation filler, but actually wanting to know. Silence answered. When's the last time you wondered about my work, my friends, my life beyond being your mother? I just assumed everything was fine. You never said otherwise. Because the questions never came. You never considered that maybe, just maybe, I'd relinquished more than you realized to give you the life you have. Dylan stood abruptly, coffee sloshing onto the table. So what do you want? An apology? A medal? You want me to feel guilty for having ambition? For wanting more than what? More than I had? More than I could give you? I stood too, facing him across the table that had witnessed every milestone of his childhood. I want you to see me, Dylan. Actually see me. Not as an inconvenient obligation or an embarrassing reminder of humble origins, as a person who might have been extraordinary before she chose to be your mother instead. You're being dramatic, and you're being willfully blind. The anger finally broke through, hot and sharp. I am Reaper Zero. That was my call sign, my identity in the military. Do you know what that means? It's a nickname. So what? It means I flew 200 missions in special operations. It means I extracted SEAL teams from situations everyone else called suicide. It means there are men alive today who wouldn't be if I hadn't flown into storms and enemy fire and impossible conditions because leaving them behind wasn't an option I could accept. My voice rose despite my best efforts to control it. It means I was extraordinary, Dylan. I was respected and decorated and studied as an example of excellence. And I walked away from all of that to be your mother. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. I never knew because you never inquired. And I never told you because I wanted you to have normal childhood, not a mother who was half ghost haunting past glories. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. But now you're a man, and you're making choices that have consequences. And one of those consequences is that you need to decide. Are you the kind of person who honors dedication, or the kind who takes it for granted? Mom, Go home, Dylan. Think about what you want your life to mean. Think about whether marrying someone who demands you erase your own mother is really the future you want. I picked up his untouched coffee, poured it down the sink. And think about whether your father would be proud of the man you're becoming. Because I'm not sure I am anymore. The words landed like bombs, and I watched them detonate across his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You don't mean that. I wish I didn't. He left without another word, and I listened to the front door close with a finality that felt like punctuation on a chapter I hadn't meant to finish yet. Rodriguez called 30 minutes later. How'd it go? He left, didn't defend himself, didn't apologize, just left. Give him time. Men are slow processors when it comes to emotional revelation. Papers rustled on her end. But Margaret, I've got what you requested. Full background on Amber Whitmore, and it's interesting. Interesting how? Interesting as in she's been engaged twice before, both times to men in finance. Both engagements ended when the men's careers hit obstacles. One got laid off, one failed to make VP on schedule. Rodriguez's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found the pattern underneath surface chaos. Amber Whitmore is a professional social climber. She's not looking for love. She's looking for security and status, and your son is just the current candidate. Dylan doesn't know. Of course not. The previous engagements were kept quiet. Society pages got scrubbed, social media got cleaned. But court records don't lie. And one of her exes filed a restraining order claiming harassment after he called off their wedding. A pause. Margaret, your son is marrying someone who's done this before. Someone who views relationships as transactions and disposes of partners when they were no longer useful. The information should have been satisfying, proof that my instincts about Amber were accurate. Instead, it just made me sad. Dylan was smart enough to run financial analysis, clever enough to climb corporate ladders, but apparently blind when it came to reading people who smiled while calculating his worth. Send me everything you have, documents, records, all of it. Already compiled. Check your email. Rodriguez hesitated. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet, but I want Dylan to have all available information before making irreversible choices. And if he chooses her anyway, then at least I'll know I tried. The words echoed Lawson's from yesterday, and I wondered if they'd coordinated their advice or if wisdom just sounded similar regardless of who spoke it. Thanks, Maria, for everything. We're not done yet. Miller's coming tomorrow, remember? Strategy session at your place, 1400 hours, be ready. She hung up before I could argue. The email arrived 5 minutes later. 47 pages of documentation, meticulously organized, every claim sourced and verified. Court records from the restraining order. Social media archives showing deleted engagement announcements. financial disclosures from both previous fiancés, showing suspicious timing of breakups correlating with career setbacks, and photographs. Amber at charity galas with different men, always clinging to whoever represented her current best option for social elevation. I printed everything, created a folder, and set it aside. Evidence for later, when Dylan was ready to see it, if he ever became ready. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 24 years. I went to the storage unit where I'd kept my military gear: flight suit, helmet, medals in a box I'd never opened after the retirement ceremony, photographs from deployments I'd never shown Dylan because explaining them would have required admitting who I used to be. The uniform still fit, though it smelled like mothballs and regret. I stood in the storage unit's fluorescent light, looking at my reflection in a dusty mirror someone had abandoned, and tried to reconcile the woman I'd been with the woman I'd become. Reaper Zero wouldn't have let anyone dismiss her. Reaper Zero flew into storms and brought people home because she decided that was what mattered, and nothing, not weather, not enemy fire, not impossible odds, could change that determination. But Margaret Chen, Dylan's mother, had spent 27 years being accommodating, being patient, being whatever her son needed her to be. Maybe it was time to remember that those two people had always been the same person, just wearing different uniforms. Miller arrived at the brownstone carrying a worn leather briefcase and the kind of righteous anger that comes from watching good people get mistreated. He was 72 now, but moved like a man who'd refused to accept age as limitation. His handshake still firm enough to remind me of pre-flight briefings in Afghanistan, when strength mattered less than certainty. "You look like hell," he observed, settling into the kitchen chair Dylan had abandoned yesterday. "I feel worse." "Good. Anger is useful, keeps you sharp." He opened the briefcase, pulled out a laptop that looked military grade. Probably was. "Rodriguez is connecting in 5 minutes. Lawson's running late, but he'll join by 1500. We're doing this properly: full tactical planning, resource allocation, objective identification. James, this isn't a military operation." "Everything's a military operation if you approach it correctly. You've got hostile actors, unclear terrain, and objectives that need defining. Only difference is nobody's shooting at us. Yet." He grinned, wolfish and familiar. "Now make coffee. The good stuff. Not that corporate swill Dylan probably drinks." I made coffee while Miller set up the video call, and by the time Rodriguez's face appeared on screen, she was already mid-briefing, slides organized with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades preparing presentations that saved lives. "Current intelligence assessment," she began without preamble. "The Whitmore situation is deteriorating faster than projected. SEC Enforcement Division accelerated their timeline. They're planning to announce charges within 6 weeks, ahead of the wedding. Richard Whitmore knows this. He's liquidating assets quietly, setting up offshore accounts, preparing for either massive fines or potential jail time." Miller pulled up financial documents on a second screen. "Which means the wedding isn't just image rehabilitation anymore. It's a deadline. Get Amber married off before the hammer falls. Secure her position before the family name becomes toxic." "Dylan is collateral damage waiting to happen," Rodriguez continued. "The moment those charges drop, anyone associated with Whitmore Capital Partners faces scrutiny. Goldman Sachs will distance themselves immediately. They can't afford the regulatory exposure. Your son could lose his job through proximity alone." The implications settled like lead weight in my chest. He has no idea. None. And Amber certainly isn't warning him. She needs this wedding to happen before reality intrudes. Rodriguez pulled up another slide, this one showing social media analytics. She's been posting engagement photos constantly. 53 posts in 2 weeks, each one carefully curated to show wealth, stability, romance. It's performance art designed to convince everyone, including herself, that this marriage is real instead of strategic. "What about the previous engagements?" Miller inquired, fingers flying across his keyboard. "The pattern Rodriguez found." "I've compiled testimony from both ex-fiancés. They're willing to talk off-record about Amber's behavior when things went wrong. One described her as calculating to the point of sociopathy. The other used the word mercenary." Rodriguez's expression hardened. Neither man made partner at their firms, Both were discarded within weeks of their career setbacks becoming apparent. And you think she'll do the same to Dylan? I think she's already planning her exit strategy. The question is whether she'll wait until after the wedding to execute it, or if she'll cut losses when the SEC announcement hits. Rodriguez leaned closer to her camera. Margaret, your son is about to marry someone who views him as a temporary solution to a permanent problem. The moment he stops being useful, she'll move on. Miller closed his laptop with deliberate finality. So we have 6 weeks before everything implodes publicly. What's our objective here? Protect Dylan, expose Amber, make sure Margaret gets the respect she deserves. All of the above, I said, surprising myself with the certainty. But priority 1 is making sure Dylan knows the truth before he makes a choice he can't undo. Even if that truth destroys his relationship? Especially then, better a broken engagement than a broken marriage. I poured fresh coffee, hands steady despite the magnitude of what we were planning. He won't believe me if I just tell him. I'm the mother he's already dismissed. We need third-party verification, documented evidence, something he can't ignore or rationalize away. Rodriguez nodded. I can provide official documentation. Court records, SEC filings, financial analysis showing the Whitmore's actual position. The question is, delivery method. If we dump everything on him at once, he'll feel ambushed and dig in defensively. Agreed. We need strategic revelation, information delivered in stages, allowing him to reach conclusions independently. Miller had shifted into mission planning mode, the part of his brain that calculated outcomes and adjusted tactics in real time. What if we arrange for him to discover it himself? How? Anonymous tip to his compliance department at Goldman Sachs. Banks run background checks on significant client connections and family members of employees. If someone flags the Whitmore investigation, Dylan's supervisors will pull him in for questioning. He'll be forced to investigate on his own, and when he finds the truth, it'll come from official sources, not his mother. The plan had merit, but something about it felt incomplete. That handles the financial exposure. What about Amber's pattern of behavior? That's trickier, Rodriguez admitted. Relationship history isn't actionable intelligence unless there's documented wrongdoing. The restraining order is sealed. I accessed it through back channels that aren't exactly legal. We can't use it directly without exposing how we obtained it. Lawson's face appeared on a third video window, his background showing what looked like a Pentagon conference room. Sorry I'm late. Briefing ran over. Where are we? Miller caught him up in 90 seconds, efficient summary that hit every key point. Lawson listened without interrupting, his intelligence officer's brain already processing variables and calculating probabilities. I can help with the compliance angle, he offered once Miller finished. I still have contacts in federal law enforcement who consult with financial institutions on regulatory matters. A quiet word in the right ear, and Goldman's compliance department starts asking questions without knowing where the concern originated. That puts Dylan under workplace pressure, I pointed out. Won't that just make him defensive? Possibly, but it also forces him to confront reality through professional channels that carry weight. His supervisors questioning his judgment is different from his mother expressing concern. The former threatens his career directly. Lawson pulled up documents on his end. Additionally, I can arrange for the SEC announcement to be leaked early to financial press. Once it's public knowledge, Dylan can't claim ignorance or dismiss it as rumor. Rodriguez was nodding, fingers flying across her keyboard. I like it. Multi-vector approach, professional pressure, public revelation, documented evidence. We surround him with truth until he can't avoid it. And what about the wedding itself? Miller questioned. Are we trying to stop it or just make sure it's an informed choice? The question hung in virtual space between us, and I realized I didn't know the answer. Part of me wanted to protect Dylan from making a catastrophic mistake. Part of me wanted him to suffer consequences of his choices, learn through pain what he'd refused to learn through love. I don't want to control him, I said finally. I want him to see clearly. What he does with that clarity is his choice. Even if he chooses wrong? Even then, I can't save him from himself. The admission hurt, but truth usually did. I can only make sure he has all the information before deciding. The call lasted another hour. Details refined and contingencies planned. Lawson would contact his federal law enforcement connections by end of business today. Rodriguez would prepare documentation packages, ready to deploy once Goldman's compliance department opened their investigation. Miller would maintain physical presence in New York, available for whatever support I needed. After they disconnected, Miller stayed, making himself at home in my kitchen the way he used to in ready rooms before missions when nervous energy needed productive outlet. "You're conflicted," he observed, watching me clean coffee cups that were already clean. "I'm angry and sad and terrified that I'm making this worse." "You can't make it worse. It's already broken. You're just deciding whether to let it break quietly or force him to see the cracks." He leaned against the counter, solid and certain. "Maggie, you know what your problem is?" "I'm sure you're about to tell me." "You spent so long being whatever Dylan needed that you forgot you're allowed to need things too. Respect, acknowledgement, basic human decency from the child you raised." His voice softened. "You're not being selfish by demanding those things. You're being reasonable." "What if he never comes around? What if I do all this and he still chooses Amber, still blames me for interfering?" "Then you'll know you tried everything possible, and his failure to see clearly is his responsibility, not yours." Miller straightened, headed for the door. "I'm staying at the Marriott in Brooklyn Heights. Call if you need anything, and I mean anything. Middle of the night, crack of dawn, doesn't matter. You're not alone in this." After he left, the brownstone felt simultaneously too empty and too full. Empty of people who mattered, full of ghosts who wouldn't leave. I climbed to the third floor, to the room that used to be Dylan's before he moved to his expensive apartment in Tribeca. Before he decided proximity to his mother was something to minimize. His childhood occupied this space like archaeological layers, each stratum marking different ages. Elementary school artwork on walls I'd never repainted. High school trophies gathering dust on shelves. Harvard acceptance letter framed beside his father's Navy commendation. The two achievements I'd been most proud of represented side by side. But looking at them now, I wondered if pride had blinded me, if focusing so completely on Dylan's success had inadvertently taught him that his needs mattered more than anyone else's, that the world existed to facilitate his ambitions. My phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. "Mrs. Chen, this is Amber Whitmore. We need to talk. Can we meet?" Every instinct said no. Meeting Amber meant giving her access to ammunition she could use against me, opportunity to manipulate or deceive. But refusing meant staying in the dark about what she wanted, and intelligence gathering required accepting calculated risks. "When?" I texted back. "Tomorrow, 11 a.m. There's a gallery in Chelsea I like. I'll send the address." The address arrived 30 seconds later. An upscale art gallery that definitely charged admission, the kind of place where price tags were considered gauche and sales happened through discreet conversation over champagne. "I'll be there." Rodriguez called immediately. She must have been monitoring my phone, which should have bothered me, but somehow didn't. "You're meeting her?" "She requested it. I'm curious what she wants." "It's a trap. She's going to try to neutralize you, convince you to accept the situation, maybe even apologize for how things went down." Rodriguez's voice carried absolute certainty. "Don't go alone. Take backup." "What backup? Miller?" "Actually, I was thinking me. I'm flying up tonight anyway. Need to deliver some documents to Lawson in person. I can be at that gallery with you, blend into the crowd, observe how she operates." "Maria, you don't need to." "I know I don't need to. I want to. Besides, it'll be educational. I've only seen this woman in photographs and surveillance footage. Time to get a live read on her tactics." She paused. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful, not expensive, not flashy, just powerful. She'll be trying to intimidate you with status symbols, counter with confidence." After we hung up, I went to my closet, pushed past the practical consulting clothes and the casual weekend wear, found the section I rarely touched, the formal pieces I'd bought for military functions, back when rank came with social obligations. Navy blue dress. Diane von Furstenberg, purchased for a retirement dinner I'd attended alone. Because Dylan had been at Harvard and couldn't make it home. Simple, elegant, authoritative, without trying to compete with new money's obvious displays. I laid it out for tomorrow, then spent the rest of the evening reviewing Rodriguez's documentation on Amber. Court records, social media archives, financial disclosures. Building a psychological profile the way intelligence officers build target packages. Identifying patterns, predicting behaviors, preparing for likely approaches. Amber Whitmore was a predator who'd learned to disguise hunting as romance. She selected targets based on potential utility, cultivated them with practiced charm, then discarded them when circumstances changed. The restraining order her second ex-fiancé had filed detailed harassment that bordered on stalking, showing up at his office uninvited, calling his colleagues to inquire about his work performance, creating social media posts designed to damage his professional reputation after he'd ended their engagement. And Dylan thought this woman loved him. Sleep came in fragments that night, interrupted by visions where I tried to warn my son but couldn't speak, couldn't make sound, could only watch as he walked into disasters I could see clearly, but he remained blind to. The gallery occupied a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and calculated industrial chic. Admission was $20, which I paid without comment, then wandered through contemporary installations that probably meant something to people who studied art theory. Rodriguez arrived 10 minutes later, dressed like a visiting professor. Understated, intellectual, completely non-threatening. She nodded once in my direction, then drifted toward the opposite end of the gallery, establishing position with tactical precision. Amber appeared at 11 exactly, wearing Chanel and diamonds like armor, her smile bright and empty as polished glass. "Margaret, thank you so much for coming." She air-kissed near my cheek, performance for anyone watching. "I love this gallery. The owner is a friend of my mother's. She does wonderful things with emerging artists." "It's interesting," I replied, non-committal. "Let's walk. I find art helps difficult conversations feel less confrontational." She guided me toward a series of abstract paintings that looked like controlled chaos, appropriate metaphor for this meeting. "I want to apologize for how things went at the engagement party." "Do you?" "I do. The announcement about the wedding guest list, that came out wrong. I never meant to hurt you." Her voice carried practiced sincerity, probably effective on people who didn't know they were being manipulated. "It's just that weddings are so stressful, and Dylan and I wanted to keep things intimate." Intimate enough to exclude his mother, but large enough for 400 guests. Interesting definition of intimate. Her smile tightened fractionally. "You're angry. I understand. Do you? Do you understand what it's like to raise a child alone, pour everything into their future, then watch them dismiss you because you don't fit their new social circle? I understand that sometimes love means stepping back, giving people space to grow." She moved to the next painting, studying it with false intensity. "Dylan talks about you constantly, how hard you worked, how much you devoted. He respects you enormously." He has a strange way of showing respect. He's torn, Margaret, between honoring his past and embracing his future. Can you blame him for wanting to move forward? Moving forward doesn't require erasing where you came from. That's not growth. That's cowardice. I kept my voice level, conversational, the way you discuss weather while calculating trajectory of incoming threats. "What do you really want, Amber?" "I want peace. I want you to understand that excluding you from the wedding isn't personal. It's practical. My family has certain expectations about how events should be conducted, and Dylan's trying to navigate between what they want and what you want, and it's tearing him apart." "So your solution is I should simply accept being erased?" "My solution is you should love your son enough to let him be happy." She turned to face me fully, dropping some of the performance. "You raised him to be ambitious, to want more than you had. Now he's achieving exactly what you prepared him for. Why can't you be happy for him?" "I am happy he's successful. I'm devastated he thinks success requires abandoning the people who got him there. That's not what's happening." "Isn't it? He's marrying into a family under federal investigation, a woman with a pattern of discarding men when they stop being useful, and he's so blinded by ambition he can't see the disaster he's walking into." I watched her face carefully, cataloging the micro-expressions that betrayed calculation underneath polished exterior. "Or maybe you're hoping I won't mention those things. hoping I'll be too polite or too conflict-averse to warn him about what I've learned. Her composure cracked, just for a second, surprise and anger flashing before control reasserted itself. I don't know what you think you've learned, but I know your father's hedge fund is collapsing. I know the SEC is preparing charges that could destroy your family's reputation and finances. I know you've been engaged twice before to men in similar positions, both times ending those engagements when their careers hit obstacles. I kept my voice low, conversational, ensuring no one else could hear. And I know you've scheduled this wedding for early June because you need it to happen before the federal charges become public, and Dylan realizes he's been selected for utility rather than love. Amber's face went perfectly still, mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. You can't prove any of that. I don't need to prove it. I just need to make sure Dylan has access to information he should have had from the beginning. What he does with that information is his choice. If you interfere with our wedding, I'll make sure Dylan never speaks to you again. I'll make him choose between us and Margaret. Her smile turned sharp. He'll choose me because I represent his future, and you represent a past he's desperate to escape. Maybe. Or maybe when he learns the truth about who you really are, he'll realize some futures aren't worth having. I stepped back, putting physical distance between us. I came here because you requested it. I've heard what you wanted to say. Now I'll give you some advice. Tell Dylan the truth about your family's situation. Give him the choice to enter this marriage with full knowledge. If you actually loved him, that's what you'd do. Love is about protecting people from things that would hurt them unnecessarily. No, that's control disguised as care. Love is about trusting people to handle truth even when it's difficult. I turned toward the exit. I raised my son to be strong enough for honesty. The fact that you don't trust him with it tells me everything about what this marriage really means to you. Rodriguez intercepted me at the gallery entrance, both of us walking toward the street in synchronized silence until we were clear of the building. How much did you hear? Enough. She threatened to alienate Dylan if you interfere. Classic manipulation tactic. Force the target to choose between competing loyalties, knowing they'll usually pick the relationship that feels newest and most exciting. Rodriguez flagged a taxi. But Margaret, you backed her into a corner. She knows you have information that could destroy everything she's building. That makes you dangerous. Good. I want to be dangerous. The admission felt liberating, claiming space I'd spent decades trying to minimize. I'm tired of being the accommodating mother who steps aside to make everyone else comfortable. About time you remembered your Reaper Zero. That woman didn't become legendary by being accommodating. We shared a taxi back to Brooklyn, Rodriguez reviewing the encounter like we were debriefing a mission, identifying what went well and what needed adjustment. She's going to accelerate her timeline, Rodriguez predicted as we crossed the bridge. You forced her hand. She'll push Dylan toward faster commitment, maybe suggest eloping or moving up the wedding date. Classic strategy when someone threatens to expose your position. How do we counter that? We accelerate our timeline too. Lawson's contact at Goldman needs to flag the Whitmore investigation immediately, before Amber can isolate Dylan further. She pulled out her phone, started typing. I'm telling Lawson to move now. Within 48 hours, Dylan's supervisors will be asking questions he can't avoid. The next morning, Dylan called at 7 a.m., voice tight with stress I recognized from his teenage years when problems felt insurmountable. Mom, something's happened at work. Can I come over? Of course. He arrived 30 minutes later, still in his workout clothes, clearly having left his apartment the moment he hung up. His face carried the pinched look of someone whose carefully constructed world had started showing cracks. Goldman's compliance department called me in yesterday afternoon. They're questioning my relationship with the Whitmores. Apparently, there's an SEC investigation into Richard's fund, and they're concerned about reputational risk to the bank. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, head in his hands. They said I need to provide documentation of any financial entanglements with Whitmore Capital Partners, prove I'm not conflicted. Mom, this could destroy my career. I poured coffee, bought myself time to choose words carefully. What did Amber say when you told her? She says it's just routine audits, blown out of proportion by competitors trying to damage her father's reputation, that the SEC does this kind of thing constantly, and it never amounts to anything serious. He looked up, desperate for confirmation. That's true, right? These investigations are usually nothing? Sometimes they're nothing. Sometimes they're precursors to major charges. I set coffee in front of him, sat across the table. Dylan, have you done any independent research? Looked at public filings? Talked to anyone outside the Whitmore circle? I tried, but the public filings are hard to interpret without financial forensics background. And everyone I know in finance either works with Richard or doesn't want to risk commenting on an active investigation. What if I told you I knew people who could help? People with access to information you can't get through normal channels. His eyes narrowed. What people? Remember I told you I was Reaper Zero? That I flew special operations? He nodded slowly. Some of the people I served with still work in intelligence, federal law enforcement areas where they have access to information civilians can't obtain easily. I contacted them to look into the Whitmore situation. For you, Dylan, to protect you. You investigated Amber's family. His voice climbed toward anger. Mom, that's invasive. That's not your place. My place is protecting my son from making catastrophic mistakes. That doesn't stop just because you're 35 and think you don't need protection anymore. I pulled out the folder Rodriguez had compiled, set it on the table between us. This contains court records, SEC filings, financial analysis, and testimony from people who've dealt with the Whitmores professionally. Everything is documented, sourced, verifiable. I'm not demanding you take my word for it. I'm asking you to review evidence and reach your own conclusions. He stared at the folder like it was something explosive. If I look at this, I'm betraying Amber's trust. If you don't look at it, you're betraying your own judgment. Trust has to be earned and verified, Dylan. Blind faith is just willful ignorance dressed up as loyalty. I pushed the folder closer. I won't force you. But I'm telling you as someone who loves you more than anyone else in this world, you need to know what you're committing to before you make promises you can't take back. He reached for the folder, pulled back, reached again, finally opened it. The first page was the SEC investigation summary. Clinical and damning. Richard Whitmore's fund had engaged in systematic misrepresentation of assets, over-leveraging positions while reporting them as secure, using accounting techniques that bordered on fraud. Estimated losses, $600 million. Projected fines, $50 to $75 million. Likelihood of criminal charges, substantial. Dylan's face went progressively paler as he read, turning pages with mechanical precision. Court records from Amber's previous engagements, financial timelines showing the pattern. Relationship intensifies, man's career falters. Engagement ends abruptly. Documentation of the restraining order. The accusations of harassment. The calculated destruction of a man's professional reputation when he tried to end things cleanly. When he reached the last page, a psychological profile Rodriguez had compiled assessing Amber's probable motivations and predicted behaviors, he looked up with eyes that reminded me painfully of the 8-year-old boy who'd learned his father was dying. This can't all be true. It's documented, Dylan. Official records, legal filings, financial disclosures. You can verify every single piece of information independently. I kept my voice gentle, giving him space to process. I'm not presenting this to hurt you. I'm showing you this because you deserve to enter any relationship with complete information. Why didn't Amber tell me about the investigation? About her previous engagements? Only she can answer that. But you need to consider, what does it mean that she kept these things hidden? What does it say about how she views your relationship? He stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with angry energy that needed outlet. You did this. You went digging because you don't like her, because you don't want me to get married and move on with my life. I did this because I watched you dismiss me, exclude me, treat me like an embarrassment. And I realized you were doing those things for someone who might not have your best interests at heart. My voice remained steady despite the hurt his accusation caused. If Amber loves you the way you deserve to be loved, these revelations won't matter. You'll work through them together. But if she's using you, if this relationship is strategic rather than genuine, then you're better off knowing now than after you've legally bound yourself to her family's catastrophe. I need to talk to her, hear her side. Of course you do. That's exactly what you should do. I stood, faced him directly. But Dylan, when you talk to her, pay attention not just to what she says, but how she says it. Whether she takes responsibility or shifts blame, whether she's honest about her motivations or continues deflecting. You want me to interrogate her. I want you to engage your critical thinking, the same analytical skills that made you successful at Goldman. Apply them to your personal life. Evaluate claims against evidence. Question convenient narratives. I moved closer, risked touching his arm. You're smart, Dylan. Smart enough to see truth when it's presented clearly. Don't let fear or stubbornness blind you to what's right in front of you. He pulled away from my touch. I need to go. Take the folder, keep it. Show it to Amber if you want, or verify everything independently. But don't ignore it just because accepting it means admitting you were wrong. He grabbed the folder, shoved it under his arm like it burned to hold, and left without another word. Through the window, I watched him stand on the sidewalk for a full minute, holding that folder, visibly torn between throwing it in the nearest trash can and actually reading what it contained. Finally, he got in his car and drove away, folder still tucked under his arm. Rodriguez called an hour later. Lawson's contact at Goldman confirmed. Dylan's supervisors are requiring a full disclosure review. He'll need to provide documentation of any financial connections to Whitmore Capital Partners, and the bank's lawyers will be monitoring the SEC investigation closely. If charges are filed, they'll likely require Dylan to recuse himself from any Whitmore-adjacent client work. He came here this morning. I gave him the folder. How'd he take it? About as well as expected. Accused me of interfering, then left angry and confused. I watched Brooklyn move through its morning routines outside my window. Ordinary people living ordinary lives unburdened by federal investigations and family betrayals. Maria, what if this pushes him closer to Amber? What if exposing her makes him defensive and he doubles down? Then he'll learn through consequences instead of warnings. That's painful, but sometimes necessary. Her voice carried the weight of experience. Margaret, you've done your part. You've provided information he needed. What happens next is his responsibility, his choice. You can't save people from themselves. Wisdom doesn't make it hurt less. No, it just makes the hurt more bearable because you know you did everything you could. Miller showed up that afternoon with lunch from a deli I'd frequented when Dylan was young, back when money was tight. And special occasions meant sandwiches that didn't come from my own kitchen. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared history and mutual respect. Lawson says the SEC is moving faster than expected. He mentioned between bites. They might announce charges within 2 weeks instead of 6. Something about a whistleblower coming forward with documentation that accelerated their timeline. Does Dylan know? If his compliance department is doing their job, they're monitoring the situation closely. He'll know soon if he doesn't already. Miller finished his sandwich, crumpled the wrapper with deliberate precision. Maggie, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Dylan makes the wrong choice anyway, that he marries this woman despite everything, either because he genuinely believes her denials or because admitting he was wrong feels worse than proceeding with a bad decision. I know. Do you? Because I've watched you raise that boy, pour everything into him, build your entire identity around being his mother. If he rejects you permanently, if this is the breach that never heals, can you survive that? The question cut deeper than Miller probably intended, exposing the fear I'd been avoiding since this whole situation began. Could I survive losing my son completely? Could I rebuild an identity that didn't center on maternal devotion? I survived leaving the military. I survived Thomas's death. I survived 27 years of single parenthood and professional reinvention. The words came slowly, tested against truth. I'll survive this too. It'll hurt worse than anything I've endured, but I'll survive. That's not the same as thriving. No, but sometimes survival is enough. Sometimes just getting through the day intact is victory sufficient. I collected our trash, disposed of it with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd learned to keep moving even when stillness felt easier. James, thank you for being here, for helping, for reminding me I'm not alone even when it feels that way. You're never alone. Rodriguez, Lawson, me, we're your team. We've got your six always. He stood, prepared to leave. Call me when Dylan contacts you again. Because he will. The folder you gave him contains information he can't ignore, and eventually curiosity will override pride. 2 days passed in heavy silence. No calls from Dylan, no texts. Just the weight of waiting for something inevitable to arrive. Then, at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, my phone lit up with notifications. Not from Dylan, from everyone else. Miller, Rodriguez, Lawson, even former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. The SEC had announced charges against Richard Whitmore. Fraud, misrepresentation, criminal referrals to the Justice Department, $58 million in fines, potential jail time, and the wedding was Saturday. My phone rang. Rodriguez. Turn on the news, it's everywhere. I found a financial channel. Watch CNBC anchors discuss the Whitmore collapse in breathless detail. Photos of Richard being escorted from his office. Speculation about family assets, whether Patricia knew, what would happen to people connected to the fund. And then, a clip from this morning. Amber Whitmore outside St. Patrick's Cathedral, looking pale and shaken, telling reporters the wedding was still happening. Dylan and I love each other. That's what matters. My father's legal troubles have nothing to do with our relationship. But the camera caught something else. Dylan standing behind her, face ashen, looking like a man who just realized he was standing on collapsing ground. She's still going through with it, Rodriguez observed. Even now, she needs that wedding to happen, needs the legitimacy of being married before everything falls apart completely. What about Dylan? That's the question, isn't it? A pause. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Lawson and I discussed this, and we think you need to be at that wedding. I wasn't invited. Your being uninvited doesn't make it less your son's wedding. And more importantly, someone needs to be there who has Dylan's actual interests at heart. Someone who can step in if this whole thing goes sideways. Maria, I can't just crash my son's wedding. You're not crashing. You're attending. There's a difference. Her voice carried absolute conviction. I'll be there too. So will Lawson. We've secured seats through Lawson's connection to the cathedral. Apparently, he consulted on security protocols years ago and still has relationships with the administration. We'll be there as witnesses, as backup, as your team. And if Dylan sees me, then he sees you. And he'll have to decide in that moment whether having his mother present matters more than maintaining the fiction Amber's built. That afternoon, my phone finally rang with Dylan's number. Mom, his voice was hollow, exhausted. Have you seen the news? I have. Amber says it's all lies, that her father's being targeted by competitors, that the SEC got bad information. A pause. But the compliance department at Goldman pulled me in again this morning. They're recommending I take a leave of absence until the investigation concludes. They're not firing me, but they're not letting me work either. What did Amber say when you told her? She said it's temporary, that once her father clears his name, everything will go back to normal. Another pause, longer. Mom, I looked at the rest of that folder, all of it. The previous engagements, the court records, the pattern. And I confronted her. She said those men were lying, that they couldn't handle strong women, that I was letting you poison my mind against her. His voice cracked. But Mom, the way she said it, the way she looked at me when I questioned her, it was like she was reading from a script, like she'd practiced this exact conversation before. What are you going to do? I don't know. The wedding's Saturday, 400 people. Her family's already in crisis, and if I call it off now... He trailed off. Dylan, listen to me. I know this feels impossible. I know you're thinking about everyone else. Amber's feelings, her family's situation, what people will think, but you need to consider, what kind of marriage are you walking into? What kind of life? I thought I knew. I thought I understood what I was choosing, but now his voice broke completely. I don't know anything anymore. Then don't make permanent decisions while you're uncertain. You can postpone. You can take time to think clearly. Amber won't agree to postpone. She says we need to show strength, that delaying would look like we're ashamed or guilty. That settled it. If Amber was pushing forward despite everything, she was more interested in the wedding than the marriage, more invested in the performance than the person. Dylan, I'm going to be at St. Patrick's on Saturday. Silence. Then, you said you weren't invited. I wasn't. I'm coming anyway. Not to cause problems or make a scene. Just to be there. Because whether you want me there or not, I'm your mother. And you shouldn't have to face this alone. Amber will lose her mind if she sees you. Amber will have other things to worry about. But Dylan, if you need me, if you need help, if you need someone who actually has your interests at heart, I'll be in the cathedral. Row 12, left side. That's where I'll be. Another long silence. Then quietly, okay, 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 I'm glad you'll be there, Mom. Even if I don't know what I'm doing yet, I'm glad you'll be there. Saturday arrived with clear skies and bitter cold, the kind of New York winter morning where the air felt sharp enough to cut. I dressed carefully. The navy dress again, Thomas's pearls, low heels suitable for standing. Rodriguez met me outside the cathedral, looking severe and professional in charcoal gray. Lawson's already inside, secured our seats, made sure cathedral security knows we're supposed to be here. She studied my face. How are you holding up? I have no idea what's about to happen. Neither does anyone else. That's what makes it interesting. She offered her arm. Ready? We entered St. Patrick's through the side entrance, avoiding the main doors where photographers clustered. The cathedral was already half full, guests arriving in expensive clothes and whispered speculation. Everyone had seen the news. Everyone knew the Whitmore family was imploding, and everyone was here to witness what would happen next. Lawson sat in row 12, left side, exactly where he'd promised. 3 seats together, him, me, Rodriguez, perfectly positioned to see everything while remaining relatively inconspicuous. The organ began playing, guests settled into seats, and at the front of the cathedral, Dylan appeared with his groomsmen, looking like a man heading toward execution rather than marriage. Amber's side of the cathedral was packed. Family, friends, society connections all dressed like this with celebration, rather than crisis management. Dylan's side was noticeably sparse. A few Goldman colleagues who hadn't abandoned him yet. Some extended family. Empty spaces where people should have been. The wedding march started. Amber appeared at the back of the cathedral, looking stunning in custom Vera Wang. Her father beside her, trying to look dignified despite being under federal indictment. They processed down the aisle, everyone standing, everyone watching. Amber's face was perfect. Practiced smile, measured steps, bride performing her role flawlessly. But as she passed row 12, her eyes swept across the guests, and she saw me. The smile faltered. Just for a second. Recognition, shock, fury passing across her face before control reasserted itself. She reached the altar. Richard handed her to Dylan, who looked like he might be sick. The priest began, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Standard ceremony, traditional vows, nothing unusual except the tension thick enough to choke on. Dylan's responses were barely audible. Amber's voice rang clear, performing even now. "If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The traditional moment of silence. No one ever actually objected. That was movie stuff, not real life. But Rodriguez stood. "I object," she said, her voice carrying across the cathedral with military authority. 200 heads turned. Amber's face went white. Dylan looked like he couldn't decide whether to be horrified or relieved. The priest stammered, This is most irregular. On what grounds?" Rodriguez stepped into the aisle. "On the grounds that the groom deserves to know who he's marrying. And the bride has been less than honest about her history and motivations." "This is ridiculous," Amber hissed. "Dylan, tell them to sit down." But Dylan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, And in his eyes, I saw the 8-year-old who used to need me, the teenager who used to trust me, the man who was finally asking himself if maybe his mother had been right all along. Dylan started, his voice barely audible, then louder. I can't do this. What? Amber's mask cracked completely. Dylan, what are you saying? I can't marry you. Not like this, not with all these lies, all these secrets. He pulled his hand free from hers. I need time. I need to figure out what's real. If you walk away now, we're done. Done, Dylan. I won't wait for you to grow a spine. And there it was, the real Amber, finally visible beneath the performance. Cold, calculating, furious that her plan was failing. Dylan looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he looked at me. I stood. I'm here, honey, whatever you need. I'm here. He walked down from the altar, past Amber, past her family, past the gasping guests, straight to row 12, to me. Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I'm so sorry. I pulled him into a hug. This son I'd raised and lost and was somehow getting back. We'll figure it out. Together. Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together. Behind us, chaos erupted. Amber shouting, her family trying to salvage something, guests recording everything on phones. But in that moment, holding my son while he finally chose substance over appearance, I didn't care about any of it. Rodriguez and Lawson flanked us, forming protective barrier, and the four of us walked out of St. Patrick's Cathedral together. Outside, winter sun hit our faces, cold and clean and honest. What now? Dylan asked, voice small. Now we go home, have coffee, talk about everything. Who I really was, who you really are, what we want to become. I squeezed his hand. And then we start building something real. No more performance, no more shame, just truth. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I should have listened sooner. You listened when you were ready. That's what matters. We walked toward Rodriguez's car, leaving the cathedral and its chaos behind. Miller was waiting at the curb, having monitored everything from outside. Told you he'd come around, he said, grinning. Took him long enough, Rodriguez replied. Yeah. Better late than absent, Lawson added. And Dylan, surrounded by people who'd fought for him even when he didn't deserve it, finally laughed. Broken, exhausted, relieved laughter. Mom, he said quietly as we drove toward Brooklyn. Tell me about Reaper Zero. All of it. I want to know who my mother really is. So I did. And for the first time in 27 years, I didn't edit myself for his comfort. I told him about the missions, the fear, the exhilaration, the choice to walk away. I told him what I'd surrendered and what I'd gained. And he listened, really listened, the way sons should. The brownstone felt different when we arrived, still the same building, but filled with possibility instead of ghosts. Rodriguez and Miller came inside, Lawson too, and we sat in the kitchen where Dylan and I had fought days before. What happens Monday? Dylan asked. My job, my apartment, everything? Monday, you deal with consequences, I said gently. Goldman might still let you go. Amber might make things difficult. The society pages will have a field day. But consequences aren't the same as catastrophe. You'll survive. We'll survive. How do you know? Because I've survived worse. Because you're stronger than you think. Because real strength isn't never falling down. It's getting up again after you do. Rodriguez's phone buzzed. She checked it, smiled. Amber just posted on social media. Dylan wasn't mature enough for commitment. She's already rewriting the narrative, making herself the victim. Let her, Dylan said tiredly. I don't care anymore. I just want to figure out who I am without trying to impress people who don't actually matter. That, Miller said, raising his coffee mug in salute, is the smartest thing you've said yet. We sat together as afternoon faded into evening, telling stories, sharing truths, rebuilding what had been broken. And for the first time since that engagement party, I felt something like peace. My son had come home. Not to the brownstone. He'd need time before moving back, but home to himself. home to the values I tried to teach him, home to understanding that real success isn't measured in job titles or social status, but in living with integrity even when it costs you everything. Mom? Dylan said as Rodriguez and the others prepared to leave. Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. That's not how mothers work, honey. We don't give up. We just keep flying through storms until we bring our people home. He smiled, genuine and soft. Reaper Zero. Always. And outside, Brooklyn settled into night, the city lights coming on one by one, each one a small promise that darkness was temporary and morning would come again, because it always did.